Welcome everyone. We will get started in the next 4 minutes. If you are connecting recently, we are going to invite you to use the second tab on the right titled Messages. Select the option for participants, which is an open channel, and use that to introduce yourselves by name and organization. We would really love to see who's in the room. And for everyone who connected early, we thank you for your patience as we get started in the next 4 minutes at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you're wondering, you in fact at the moment do not have access to mic and camera, this is intentional, do not worry. We will provide access for you when it's time for the open discussion section of this presentation. See you in 3 minutes. Okay, we are going to get started. Thank you to everyone who connected early. And if you're just connecting, as I mentioned, please feel free to use the second tab on the right titled Messages, as we'd love to hear where you're coming from by name and organization. Welcome, everyone. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Alejandra Vargas. I am a senior program specialist with Canada's International Development Research Centre. And on behalf of the entire team working for the FutureWORKS initiative, including my colleagues, Jillian Dowie, Paul Acqui, and Annette Despau, present here, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's information session. For our translators, I will now share a few words of welcome in French. Bienvenue tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone. I am Alejandra Vargas, Inaudible, and I work at the IDRC, Inaudible. as a specialist for responsible for the programs. In the name of all the teams here at FutureWORKS, we want to thank you for coming aboard here today and joining us. The session today, you can see it, the session here in front of us with our slides. There's also simultaneous interpretation if you wish to choose your language of preference. And you can also ask the questions in your language of preference.
We will provide a few remarks of what this initiative intends to achieve. We are going to guide you through the key hub responsibilities and eligibility criteria, and following that, we're going to fully open the session to answer your questions and comments. As I mentioned in French and was translated already, so you're seeing it happen in real time because we have simultaneous translation. At any point, feel free to use the language of your choice for posing questions during the open session. Now, I'm going to provide you a few instructions on how your session can go as smoothly as possible through Kudo. Jillian, would you mind showing the next slide? The first thing is to note that your mics and cameras are not accessible now. Please don't panic. This is intentional. We want to ensure good sound quality. When you reach the question period, if you wish to post your question verbally, you'll see the request to speak button at the bottom of your screen. You can hit that, and at one point our host will provide you access so you can start your camera and your mic and pose your question verbally. Or you can also use the messaging tab, which many of you have used already, to write in the chat at any point. First thing is, if you haven't already, to ensure you have translation or that you're listening to this in the language of your choice, please go to the left side of the screen under interpretation language and select the language you want to listen to. Next, a reminder that, of course, sound quality is key, particularly for our translators. So if you can, wear headsets or make sure that the sound quality is suitable. If at any point we can't hear your question, we invite you to write it down in the messages in the chat, and that's how we'll raise it if we can't hear you very well. If you aren't already and you have any problems, please use either Chrome or Edge as your browser. It will give you better quality for today's session. If you have any technical issues throughout this presentation, please feel free to select the Messages tab. You're going to see the category titled Technical Support, and then you'll be able to write any problems that you're facing, and a Kudo representative will be here to troubleshoot those for you. Please avoid using the Participants tab if you can. That's our open channel, and would like to reserve that for comments or questions pertaining the presentation. A reminder again that if you want to ask questions, you have two choices. One is to go to the Messages tab under the Participants category. That's our open channel. You can introduce yourself, raise comments, questions, anything you want throughout this presentation. And then the other option is throughout question period only to click on the Request to Speak button at the bottom of your screen. Our host, which is Jillian, will eventually grant you access. At that time, you'll be able to speak. And we ask you that when you're done speaking, please remember, if you can, to hit the Done Speaking button to ensure sound quality. With that in mind, I think we'll get started, and I pass on the floor to my colleague, Jillian Dowie.
Great. Thanks very much, Alejandra. Just switch the slide. Okay. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope that this is going to be a useful session for everyone. I am going to quickly go over the objectives and the thematics of this call. This is all detailed, of course, in the call document, but I'll quickly summarize it for our discussion today. Basically, what we're looking for is hub organizations or consortia who will design and lead a regional network of researchers and institutions looking at skills systems and social protection solutions in the face of major challenges to the nature of work, specifically rapid digitalization and the low carbon transition. These systems should enhance economic mobility and future readiness of workers and need evidence to inform their transformation. To help us achieve this, we've set several objectives for this global initiative. The main goal is to support high quality, innovative, and gender responsive research on future of work challenges and opportunities in the face of the drivers of change that I've mentioned, technological advancement and digitalization, such as artificial intelligence, and the low carbon transition. And to help us get there, one, we want to support research agendas led by institutions in the regions of focus on these issues in order to generate contextual, innovative policy and practical solutions. Two, we want to foster networks for peer learning and collaboration within and across the global initiative, building a strong and impactful evidence base and a strong and impactful network of researchers and practitioners who are linked to one another. And three, we want to support knowledge translation and uptake by engaging policymakers, private sector actors, worker organizations, and other key stakeholders to use the evidence and scale solutions. So really about, research for use, research for action. And finally, I just want to quickly touch on the themes of the call. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I want to emphasize that what we're looking at are major drivers that will and are changing the nature of work, the need to transition to a low carbon economy, and the structural supply chain, resource, and other issues that stem from that, and the rapid expansion of digital technologies, including AI, and the way that that may impact and change jobs, tasks, industries. We want to look at these through the lens of skills development systems and social protection, which means taking into account new entrants into the labor market and equipping them with what they need, as well as supporting the transition of current workers in the labor market as the nature of work and their jobs changes. And finally, we want to be really orienting to outcomes of decent quality jobs and enhanced economic mobility, as in preparing workers to be adaptable and to learn as change happens, as opposed to more traditional approaches of sort of job or sector-specific training. The guidance that I want to share around all of this is that the Hub has a really important role in coordination, communication, learning, and support, meaning there's a cross-section of expertise that will really be the foundation of the network, of building this network. So we're looking for multidisciplinary teams. So clearly, there's a role for economists and labor market experts, but there needs to be sound capacity and grounding in both the dynamics created by climate change and by the introduction of advanced technology. We need strong gender and inclusion expertise, as that needs to be a sort of central consideration in the work that you're proposing and eventually supporting. You'll want to have monitoring, evaluation, and learning capacity, and you'll want to ensure some strength in knowledge translation, as well as the ability to run a large regional initiative. So we're looking to assess proposals based on how dynamic it is in terms of how they approach the intersections of these issues and how much capacity there is to deliver the objectives. So overall, we want to emphasize again that the drivers of change, low carbon transition and digital technologies and AI, as well as gender inclusion and program management considerations, are really essential to have addressed in your proposals in a very integrated way. I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Alejandra to go over more of the eligibility questions that will probably answer several of the queries that we're going to get today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. I wanted to quickly guide you through hubs, regional networks. What do we mean by them? What are some of the key responsibilities? So as you've probably noticed, this call is a little different than perhaps some of the more traditional IDRC ones that you've seen for individual research projects. So let me just say that at the core, what we expect from hubs is that they are intended to design, to manage, and to support research networks in each region. And the decision to do this through hubs was quite intentional in lieu of merely supporting individual research projects. And that's because, one, we wanted to build cohesion and collaboration across projects. We wanted to make sure that there were cross-thematic links that Jillian just alluded to. And we wanted to make sure that the initiative really contributed to more than the sum of individual research projects. So the hubs at the core have the following objectives. One is that they're intended to foster high-quality research. You're expected, if you're managing a hub, to develop an integrated research program that aligns with IDRC's call objectives and background. It's expected that hubs will lead learning and capacity strengthening strategies. This can look like anything from promoting the advancement of next generation researchers to making sure that key actors, industry actors, private sector, government, civil society, understand and act on emerging evidence. And then our third objective is to foster sustained networking and cross-sectoral partnerships. We really want to make sure that this is a research network that spans borders and disciplines, that part of the intention is that the hubs is quite keen to develop and carry out peer learning and knowledge exchange activities, fostering collaborations across projects. And then we also want to make sure that support knowledge mobilization, to make sure that we are helping decision makers, which includes worker representatives, private sector, government, across the skills ecosystem to be able to use the evidence in decision making and scale good practices. Now, while hubs are going to be evaluated based on how their proposals address these core objectives, I want to emphasize that we very much welcome innovation from hubs. We want to hear from you about how you think the scope of work should look like, about proposing new ideas other than what you're reading in the call, and also to help understand how it is that you suggest shaping the governance structure in a way that works for you. So there's a lot of room for innovation besides what you see in the call document, and we welcome that. We want to emphasize that we're going to be supporting up to 5 hubs total. That's clear from the call, and that the FutureWORKS initiative is a 5-year initiative. So there's an expectation for collaboration, which will include not only the research activities, but also synthesis, uptake, capacity strengthening, and reporting activities, which is why you'll see that when we ask you to propose what will eventually be calls in your respective regions, the research supported there is for 4 years, because there's an expectation that we'll spend one bringing everyone together, doing synthesis of results, working on monitoring, evaluation, learning, reporting, and all those set of activities. The hubs, and this is key and needs to be clear from the outset, are expected to work with each other. Moreover, IDRC is going to secure a KT organization, an ML organization that is expected to work with all hubs to connect the dots on your work. And there is an expectation that as you're submitting an application, this collaboration is implied and will be secured from the beginning through and throughout the initiative cycle. We expect, for example, that the hubs are going to help to collectively think about critical issues. One example is approaches to gender equality and inclusion, to identify common challenges that might be related to drivers of change and avenues to policy uptake. And then the last piece is that IDRC is only going to be granting with the hub lead. So the lead is going to sub-grant with other members of the consortium, applicants in this call, and eventually with selected research organizations that are going to emerge from the competitive research calls that hubs will eventually launch. So for this reason, it is critical to make sure that there's a strong hub lead that has both technical, administrative, and financial capacities to manage this work. Next slide, Jillian, please. And just really quickly to give you a little bit more color on some of the granular tasks that we're talking about. So hubs will be expected to contribute and jointly shape a theory of change across the initiative and a MEL framework, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. As you all know, you'll be expected to design and launch a competitive call for proposals in the region of focus. This is why this application, you'll notice, asks you to provide a sample of that call, outlining what you believe are the most relevant research questions that applicants should eventually answer, how you would support selected projects, learning and uptake, and questions of this nature. Hubs will manage the research projects, both providing technical support, but also funding them directly. And as I mentioned before, research projects are expected to have a duration of about 4 years. The 5th year is devoted to all other activities like synthesis, strategic positioning of results, etc. Hubs need to ensure that intersectional gender approaches are truly central to the analysis. What we mean by that is that this needs to permeate from anywhere from the research questions and the methodological choices that you use, as well as all the elements of the work that hubs will do, including team composition, which peer learning activities are proposed, your positioning efforts, and who are the target audiences of these efforts. So if you have any questions in our call, there's a link to IDRC's Gender Equality and Inclusion Statement, and it will give you a little bit more details of what we mean by gender intersectional approaches. Hubs need to develop a capacity strengthening plan with peer learning and knowledge exchange activities proposed. And lastly, a knowledge translation plan, which tells you what are going to be the synthesis activities, the strategic engagement opportunities, and demonstrating how the hubs are going to support individual research projects to position results iteratively with decision makers. Now I'm going to pass the floor to Paul, who's going to guide you through the eligibility criteria. Thank you so much, Paul. So I see some questions are starting in the chat, and we're using the rest of the time to really answer any questions. So I'm going to be fielding some of them. There's a question on how is IDRC defining the future of work field? Gillian, would you like to respond to that one?
Sure. So in the context of the call and what we're looking for, this is about the drivers of change that we've discussed, which is the low carbon transition, which is the sort of advanced technologies, AI, things like that, and the way that they're changing the nature of work. But in terms of the eligibility, where we say expertise in the future of work field, this is really much broader than that. And it can be just about, you know, the experience that you have in doing work on the future of work from many different perspectives. It can be the changing nature of work. It can be digitization, platformization. It can be skills development systems and building connections between public, private sector, and so on. So this can actually be interpreted pretty broadly in the sense of how we might assess the work that you've done in the past. But it's really about, however you're doing it, looking towards how to reshape skills development systems, how to reshape labor market policies to be more future oriented, to adapt to drivers of change in the labor market, and how you've done that before as an organization. So that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but the expertise that we're looking for should come through around particularly labor market skills and these kind of major drivers of change. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, there's a few more coming in. I'll tackle a few and pass a few others to Paul. There's a question of, can a consortium have 2 lead organizations? No, the consortium needs to have 1 lead organization. A consortium can have as many members as you deem prudent, and there has to be an explanation of how they're adding value, but there will only be a grant given to 1 lead organization. There is a question, Paul, for you on, do hubs need to define the sub-grantees from the outset? Laura, you had a question. I'm an NGO from Argentina. Can we apply? Can we lead the application? Do we need a Canadian institution? So I'll tackle this question so we don't go into country by country, generally speaking. So as is stated in the call document, research institutions, research organizations, and higher education institutions, public and public universities can apply. Similar private sector, international organizations can apply, but those can't lead. In your case, as an NGO, you can be a member of a consortium. You cannot lead the hub. Do we need a Canadian institution? No, it's not a requirement that consortiums have Canadian representation. Of course, if you see value in that and makes sense and it's detailed, we value that, but it's not going to be the defining factor for selecting a hub or another. In terms of Argentina, can you apply? Yes. So you know, in the document section of the Kudo, you're going to see the frequently asked questions section. We put it up there because it includes a list to all the places where IDRC works. There's a link titled literally where we work, and it gives you a sense of all the countries where IDRC operates. The only restrictions you should know about is that as a Canadian Crown Corporation, we are bound by Canadian law. So the government of Canada decides for a number of reasons, sanctions being one of them, that we are not going to be supporting research with certain organizations in a certain country, and that information is available on the Government of Canada's website. We are bound by those rules. Overall, in general, we work in Argentina, we have projects there. And our main mandate, as you know from this call, is to support research focused on the Global South, low-income countries. Okay, there's a few more questions. Ana Miranda, good question. Jillian, will the hubs be able to conduct their own research or only through the sub-grant calls?
So the intention is that the hubs will not technically be doing their own research. It is defining the research agenda and supporting the institutions that are selected as subgrantees to actually lead the research. Now, as part of that, there can be some background activities going on to dictate what, or to sort of determine what those entry points are. There can be different forms of support that allow you to actively engage with the researchers that you're going to be working with. And of course, we welcome, smaller pieces of work as you go around synthesis and things like that that will create research. But in terms of the kind of applied research, we would envision that being really the subgrantees, and the hubs lead the agenda setting. They take the agenda setting role.
Perfect. There's a few questions, Paul. I'll send them your way. It says, eligibility criteria stated in the terms of reference. The question is, we want to inquire if it's necessary for international organizations to be nonprofits, or can profit-making development organizations also apply? Linked to that, there's a question, Paul, on it wasn't clear to one of the participants based on the eligibility if government parastatal organizations can bid directly. Would you mind clarifying that since they're linked? Perfect. Jillian, I'm going to send some your way, which are kind of going back to what kind of organizations are eligible to apply or not. There's questions about, can an NGO from higher income country lead or just participate as a member of a consortium? And similar to that, can team members from Hub or any organizations be from high income countries?
So the first part of that question, in terms of high income countries and institutions within them, cannot lead these applications, but can be a participating member as long as that organization has meaningful experience in the region, understands the dynamics, and creates a lot of value into the proposal. But cannot be the lead institution, can be a consortium member. And in terms of members of teams of lead organizations who are from high income countries, that's also that's fine, as long as the institution is based in sort of a lower middle income country in the region of focus and has sort of meaningful experience and leadership from that region. But there can be members of the team, of course, from all over the world who are within that institution and working directly for them.
Perfect. I'm going to take one from Ivy, and Ivy, please clarify if I'm misunderstanding your question, but you wrote, can existing consortia networks apply? I'm hoping I'm reading this right, that what you're asking is if you already have a grant or are part of a consortia networks with IDRC, can you submit an application for this call? If that's the case, yes, if you have an existing project with IDRC, you can apply for this application. Of course, one of the things that we assess is what role you're playing and make sure that there's a justification as to why you have the time and capacity to do this work well, but there is no restriction in being able to already have a grant with IDRC and apply to this. I hope I understood that correctly. And then Annette, this is a question for you. It's about the budget distribution expectation, kind of how we see distribution for hub operations versus eventual money that will be going to grants, and the maximum amount of how each grant can, what it can look like in Canadian dollars.
Well, we don't have a fixed percentage for research or non-research. However, as you know, this is a hub, and there will be a letter organization and co-applicants organizations. So all the budgets related to co-applicants should be reflected under research expenses. You need to use IDRC budget templates. So we are expecting more of the budgets allocated to research expenses.
Thank you, Annette. That's absolutely right. We didn't put, as you saw in the application, a percentage that should go as an obligatory minimum or maximum. You know, of course, the maximum you can ask in terms of funding is 1.7 million. But one of the things that the evaluation criteria will assess is we obviously want to see the majority of the funds, as Annette said, go to research activities. So there'd have to be a justification as to based on what you're proposing, how the budget distribution is commensurate and makes sense to achieve the objectives per the call. There's a question of, do you hope for a team to lead the hub, or can a team lead a hub? And do all team leaders need to be from the hub main institution, or can they be affiliated elsewhere? Jillian, would you like to tackle this one?
Sure. If I understand correctly, what I would say is that the sort of the lead, if there's a sort of a PI, a principal investigator, would be from the hub institution, but you can have co-PIs, co-leads from consortium members as well. That's an acceptable leadership structure in terms of how you run it. Can be kind of a steering committee, something along those lines. So all of the leads in terms of individuals don't have to be from one institution, which would be the lead institution. But of course, it's important that leadership sits within that, but can be shared, if I've understood the question correctly.
Since I have you, Jillian, I'll also ask, there's a question, in case of a lead applicant from India, so good to tackle this one. Do additional approval processes from the government, are they required? Yes,
there are additional approval processes for India. That's a question that perhaps you can send also directly to our email address, fow@idrc.ca, and we can take on a little bit of this conversation on the side. But for those who are on the call from India, we do have additional approval steps with the government that can take roughly 3 to 6 months. It's something to be aware of. And then, of course, something to note is the sub-granting requirements as well as something to think about in that case.
Paul, this is a question for you. There's a IB asks if consortia can be Africa-wide. So maybe you can explain the distinctions on the 2 hubs in Africa. Thank you, Paul. There's a question from Sharia on elaborating on what we mean by legal status. Do we mean that the organization has to be a registered entity within the country? Annette, would you like to respond to this one?
Yes, could you repeat? I couldn't hear you.
Yes. What do we mean by legal status? Does the organization need to be a registered entity within the country?
Yes, exactly. You need to have a registration in the country in which you operate, so you can enter into agreements. That is what we define as a legal entity. You need to have corporate documents to be registered in the country you work, and you can be able to financially administer the grant.
A key component of that is being able to manage grants, but also be able to disburse funds in a timely manner to sub-grantees. So that's why the selection of hub lead matters greatly, because there's an expectation that this organization will be disbursing funds on a real-time basis and needs to have the capacity to do so across organizations and potentially across countries. There is a question of, since you accept applications from individual organizations, technically collaborating institutions are not necessary. That is correct, Rima. You can apply as an individual organization. One thing is you'd have to kind of demonstrate then how this individual organization would be meeting all of the call objectives in terms of peer learning, knowledge sharing, fostering networks, gender intersectional approaches. If that's something that a single organization can do, then that's perfect. And if not, the expectation of consortiums would be able to make sure that you have a group, a consistent little network that allows you to best accomplish what the call sets out to do. So that's kind of a decision that each application needs to make on their own. Okay, there's a question on we can apply as an independent organization. I think that's the same question, like as a single organization, and then we will be clubbed under a hub shortlisted by IDRC based on our region and work. If I understand, Catherine, so two things. One is you can apply, like I just mentioned in the response to Rima, to lead a hub as an individual organization. If you do not want to have more members be part of a consortium, you will not be clubbed under any existing hub. We will be selecting up to 5 hubs, and there will be no individual applications that then get housed under any of the hubs. We will select up to 5 hubs to be led either by consortiums or individual organizations, and then subsequently this hub's one of their responsibility is that they will design and launch competitive call for proposals. So at that point, applicants in the region can apply through that competitive process and receive a sub-grant from the hubs to conduct research in the respective regions. I hope that answers that question. If not, happy to clarify. There's a question of if a consortium already exists and qualifies under most of the above criteria, can they apply? Paul, would you like to tackle this one? Jillian, if you can clarify for Sanchita if by collaborating institutions we mean consortium members.
Yes, I think we're using a few terms for different things, but essentially whatever group of organizations that you want to pull together to apply for this, you'll have one lead and then several members, consortium members, collaborators, whatever term. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanchita. This one also for you, Jillian. How many thematic areas are allowed per hub?
We don't have a sort of a limit on what we're talking about there, but what I think is just important while you're writing it is understanding that we're looking at those intersections and the way that these different drivers of change around technology and low carbon transition are playing in. So we definitely want to see both of those thematics integrated, and then you can have different sort of entry points and research questions and areas of focus that you want to bring in, but that's to be determined by your own expertise, your own sort of assessment of the need of the region and the countries within the region and so on. So there's no, I wouldn't say that there's a clear limit on the types of themes as long as you're touching on some of those key areas and really centralizing gender within that as well.
Perfect. There's a question about how many proposals can be sent by a leader institution. So applicants can submit multiple applications, but just to be clear, if you are intending to be the lead of a hub, you can only be the lead for one proposal. You can be a collaborating institution or a hub member in different proposals, and that would be assessed on the merits of each individual application, but you can only apply to lead one proposal. Paul, can global offices based in North America of multi-country organizations apply, or does it have to be the regional office? Jillian, there's a question about whether a hub needs to comprise organizations in the same countries, and can a hub with different organizations from different countries apply? So what's the composition regionally speaking of hubs?
The composition of the hubs is fairly flexible, as long as the lead institution needs to be within the region, and of course, other consortium members should be within or have a very strong focus and emphasis on the region. It doesn't all have to be from one country, though. We would welcome several different countries coming together to create a consortia. That's completely fine. There's no limit to that. No issue with that. Yeah.
There's a question as to, do all the partnership, and I understand by that, like, does the entire composition of a consortium need to be mentioned at the time of application, or can you form a partnership at later stages and inform IDRC? And there's the second question of, do we need financial and organizational details of the partnering organization? So ideally, what we'd like is that when you submit an application, you have a sense as a consortium. There is a requirement that you have had meaningful conversations of how that consortium is put together. And one of the requirements is to have a letter that justifies how that partnership is expected to work. That doesn't preclude you later on from identifying more members that you'd like to be part of the consortium, especially if it strengthens it and allows it to better serve call objectives. You're not required or forbidden from having new members join at a later stage. But of course, for your application, we'd like you to submit a strong and clear composition of what those memberships are, as you have at the moment of the application. Do you need to submit at this stage financial and organizational details of the partnering, either collaborating or other hub member institutions? You'll see in the call that you're required to provide the details on who are the other consortium members, their organizations, websites. There is an expectation in the application that you also detail what are their respective roles, what is each one contributing to. You're not expected to present more documentation, financial nature-wise, of partnering organizations. You're expected to present one budget, which includes under research category all of the expenses for supporting any other consortium member. You're also expected, as I mentioned, to present that letter, which outlines an agreement from all consortium members to actively participate in the research supported throughout this initiative. I hope that clarifies that. Okay, there are a few more questions. Is any member or members of the hub eligible to bid for any call for proposals for the hub itself? Jillian, would you like to tackle this one?
As in, okay, if I'm understanding, you're saying, can members of a consortium then apply as subgrantees? Right, okay, so that would create, I think, a conflict of interest, and therefore we would say no. I mean, the members of the consortia and the lead of the consortia and hub need to exclusively be responsible for sort of managing that network, setting the research agenda, supporting the subgrantees, but it would create a conflict of interest if you applied then to be a subgrantee as well. So you might want to instead wait until a call goes out and respond to that, but up to you which role you want to take. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely right. And that was raised in several questions. So of course, because there's an expectation that the hubs will assess eventually applications coming from that competitive call for proposals process, you can be kind of, judge and party in this case. So no, you'd have to make a determination on that. I was asked if this session is being recorded and that can be shared. Yes. You'll also notice, I'll mention it now, on the document section tab, which is the fourth one on the right, you're going to see a copy of a frequently asked questions document, which outlines responses, many of which we've given already. So you can use that as a basis for your application. And also happy at any point, if you have additional questions or clarifications, to please email us. Our email address is fow@idrc.ca, and I'll make sure to put that on the chat. So we welcome questions throughout the application process. Okay, we'll take a few more. Can researchers from an international organization located outside the region be associated or be part of a consortium? Paul? Thank you, Paul. I'm seeing some repetition in the question, so we can emphasize or re-emphasize a few points, but I'll tackle new ones first. So, Jillian, what is the relationship between consortium and subgrantees?
So the relationship between these two groups is that the consortia will come together as the lead, the hub institution. They'll define the research agenda, they'll create the call for proposals, identify the subgrantees, and then basically manage this network for the sort of 5-year duration of the program. So you'll be directly working with subgrantees in different ways, like things that we'd love to see, or just you would be providing support around gender and inclusion, strengthening their approaches to that, or helping to strengthen different approaches to climate change focused research, or questions around advanced digitalization, and all of these kinds of things. So you'll have a really clear participatory role working with subgrantees and helping them advance their research, as well as ensuring that the research that they're doing is meaningful in context, that they have a sort of plan for policy connections, or connections with other users of evidence, private sector workers organizations, and that regionally you're actually using all of the evidence from the different projects to sort of synthesize, to build those linkages, to create some visibility. So there's quite a strong network management approach, as well as a lot of support that you would be giving subgrantees over the course of the project. You'll be very closely engaged with them.
Thank you, Jillian. There's a question on whether consortiums are expected to incorporate all indicative research questions in the proposal, or can just write a proposal addressing one question of choice. So what I would say here is, as you've probably seen from the application, you are expected to indicate what would be the key research questions that you will eventually ask people applying for a competitive call for proposals to tackle. If you want to focus on one, that's fine. But what I would say is you want to give us a great sense of what is essentially a sample call that demonstrates how you as a hub, right, would be addressing the key kind of fundamental thematic linkages that Jillian outlined earlier. So you want to put your best foot forward in showcasing why you've selected the research questions you've selected, why they're important against realities in the future work field and regional dynamics. So you want to give us as comprehensive a view as possible of the type of call for proposals you will eventually support, and the type of hub that you will support thematically and administratively, and in terms of knowledge translation, synthesis, and all of those key characteristics. So just to put that out there. There's a good question, Paul. How many competitive calls for proposals are hubs expected to put out within the 5 years? Thank you, Paul. A clarification for Dorothy. Yes, if you are applying to lead a hub or be a consortium member in a hub, and you are selected by IDRC, then you would not also be eligible to receive funding of the competitive research call process that the hub will eventually design and manage. That would be a conflict of interest, and that would not be possible. Okay, let me see a few, and there's a few that are repeated. Rosa asked, can an organization submit more than one application? We had answered that yes, you can, but if you are planning to lead a hub, you can only apply to proposals as lead once. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's anything else that we haven't tackled from the questions. Yes, we covered one from Dorothy. Oh, yes, Jillian, one for you. Can a university department apply?
Yes, of course. Very easy.
Okay, this is another question that's emerged. How do you define high income country? Do you have a certain GDP or GDP per capita you're looking at that might exclude any country from serving or being part of a hub? Jillian.
You can find guidance on the definitions we're using through the World Bank. I think that link is somewhere in the call as well, but basically the World Bank maintains a kind of list of low, lower middle, upper middle, and high income countries. And if your country is on any given one of those lists, you'll understand your eligibility.
There's a question on, can the private sector entity be part of the consortium? The answer is yes. They cannot lead a consortium, but they can be part of it. There's a question, Paul, if a country, and this is just one example, Colombia is an upper middle country, does that mean that they can lead a proposal? Do you want to specify who can lead a proposal based on the categorization and being based in a region and the type of research we support? Thank you, Paul. There's a question on, should hubs budget for things like independent evaluations? Is there any guidance in the proportion of the total budget that should be allocated to this? Jillian.
Sorry, Alejandra, I was just reading a different question. Could you repeat that?
Absolutely. Should hubs budget for an independent evaluation? And is there any guidance on the proportion of the total budget? And if you have also, killing two birds with one stone, any other expenses that people should account for? And if we have guidance on the proportion of the budget for those?
Sure, I did see a number of budget-related questions. So the first thing on the evaluation, that's to be determined by the team if you want to include an evaluation, though in a project of this size, that is, of course, a good practice and should be budgeted within the proposal that you bring in. The limit, I saw a question about overheads. IDRC has a limit of 13% for the lead grantee and all partners in terms of overhead costs. And in terms of guidance for that, there's some questions around the budget for each subgrant, as well as the breakdown of the budget between the lead institution, or the consortia, and then the subgrants. This is a little bit less clear. I mean, this is something that's to be determined based on, the structure you would envision for your hub. We don't have strict guidance. One thing I would really say is we want the majority of the funding, of course, to go towards research, which means to go towards those subgrants. Anywhere from, I would, 60 to 70%, but this is based on the value of what's presented back in the proposal in terms of the supporting activities, all of the different elements that you would be bringing into the planning of creating that network, structuring it, governing it, providing support, etc. So it needs to be determined based on that, but we're going to be assessing certainly the value of comparing, seeing how much is going out towards research, how much is going to the hub support functions. And in terms of grant size, I would say that we also don't have clear guidance that we can offer on that. That's to be also determined by the consortia, but we are looking for sort of meaningful and practical research, and not, we're not looking for a series of sort of smaller papers, though of course there can be different sized activities. But just keeping in mind that we do want sort of meaningful research that can run over the course of upwards of 4 years, and keeping that in mind when you're determining what a reasonable budget limit would look like when you're doing your subgranting. And any other question, I think for some other budget related questions that might have been in the chat, I don't know if Alejandro, you want to say any more, or Annette, if you have anything you want to share.
Give the open floor to Annette, because there's a few ones. So Annette, if you want to go ahead and answering all of the questions on, can we fund PhD researchers with a budget? and maximum amounts from Dorothée. So I'm going to give you open floor to tackle all of those if you don't mind.
Thank you. Yes, you can include PhD funding. This is it should be reflected on training, and we don't have a maximum amounts for the teams. That is something that, as Gillian already mentioned, it needs to be determined by the hub, depending on the role and responsibility of each team. So that will depend on the structure of the hubs.
Annette, there's also questions on financial statements, like requirements that a hub lead will have to demonstrate to be able to qualify for receiving a grant, if I understood the question correctly.
Yes, the lead applicant should submit to IDRC audited financial statement, the most recently audited financial statement. If they don't have audited, they could submit the financial statements. And we also are going to request some administrative documentation, for example, procurement policy, financial policies. So, but mainly will be the audited financial statement, but we accept non-audited financial statements, just for the lead applicant.
Okay, we're going to do a little bit of rapid fire in answering some of these. Figures and tables allowed in your application. SMA apply will not allow you to do that. You can, and also a recommendation, please download the application form in SMA, fill it out in Word, and then copy and paste the fields into SMA apply. That way you have a version saved in Word in case of any issues. There are kind of already expectations for work plans and documents you need to upload, in which you can present them in the format of your choice. So if you want to use figures and tables, Etienne, that's absolutely fine. But in the core kind of questions that are part of the applications, no, you're not allowed or expected to provide kind of figures and tables linked to those answers. It's only for the associated documents that have an open format, which includes things like the work plan. You'll see the budget form already has a template. It's in Excel. So those need to be kind of completed as such. But no, the actual kind of question by question fields would not allow you to include hyperlinks or to add tables. And there's a word limit count for each of those sections. Emmanuel, hola Manuel, you asked if we could ask Spanish to the interpreting services in the future, and if one of these hubs ends up being in Latin America. Absolutely. You know, our expectation would be that activities done by the Latin American hub will happen in Spanish, and that would be tackled. One thing, Emmanuel, and this is kind of just for clarity, you know that one of the expectations in terms of eligibility is that hubs need to be able to operate in English and in the language of the region where the hub is being led. So we do expect applicants from Latin American hubs to be able to speak in Espanol as well as in English for all activities. That will help with reporting, and it will also help with communication between hubs. Okay, we've covered some of these. Should the selected hub choose my organization directly to be part of a consortium? Jillian, would you like to talk about this question from Nirvana?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm super clear on the question, but if you want to be in a hub, but you want to or are not eligible to lead a hub, then of course you're welcome to join a different organization who is eligible to lead. They can then be the sort of lead applicant, and you can be part of their consortium. But if you're asking if we would make that connection after the proposals are submitted, no, we're going to be working with sort of fully formed hubs that come through this proposal process as a predefined group, I would say.
That's absolutely right. Career public universities are eligible for funding, so easy answer. How many projects can be funded by a hub? Is there a budget ceiling per project? We don't have a maximum or minimum amount that we've put in the application for how many projects we expect a hub to eventually support through a competitive call process. We want to emphasize that we'd expect that, of course, it be a significant number in the sense that, you know, our main mandate is to support research being funded. So we want to see that reflected in the budget and, you know, in your application. But we're not predetermining that for you. Part of the expectations is that in your application, you would outline how many you intend to support with what budget and why, and how you would manage a hub of that size based on what you're putting in your application, Tom. Okay. Overhead, questions on overhead for hubs. Annette, would you like to address that question for Crystal?
Yes, IDRC accepts a maximum of 13% of indirect cost. That means this is the 13% is calculated over the total direct cost, including the lead applicants and the co-applicants' direct cost.
There's questions on thematics and kind of what would be eligible. There's one about malnutrition. I'm not gonna speak on each specific kind of theme proposed here. But what I would say is I would encourage you, Mr. Ture, to look at the call to see which indicative research questions and the thematics of what this call supports in making a determination of how and what you put forward in an application. But I don't believe that necessarily applies, but I would refer you back to the call document to see. There was a question about, do you need to kind of address in your call for proposals all the indicative research questions that we put as IDRC's guidance in the call document? And the answer is no. And also, if you have suggestions as what other kind of research questions are relevant, that's kind of what we want to see you reflect in your application. Which ones you think for the dynamics of the region and the knowledge gaps are most relevant? And what we're putting out there is just as stated in the call document, indicative research questions to give you a sense of the thematic linkages and expectations from IDRC. That doesn't impede you or preclude you from adding to that or thinking differently and explaining kind of what you're proposing to do. Can a private company involved in research apply and later enter into a collaboration? There wasn't a finished sentence with professionals in diverse. Okay, I think you mean to say, can a private sector company that works on research apply? Yes, you can be part of a consortium. A private sector organization cannot lead a consortium. Could you later enter into a collaboration? By that I mean maybe join another hub or be part of multiple hub applications. Yes, you can apply, have several applications, but as stated, I'll repeat again, you can only lead one application. There's a question of, can a lead organization complement its capacity on future work through a consortium partner? Jillian, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, yes, of course. That's exactly how we would envision that kind of a relationship working out. If you have a lot of strength in one area and not in another, then you're very welcome to find an institution to partner with you who does bring in that expertise that you would need.
Sanchita asked if all team members must be either from the lead or consortium partners. I mean, yes, at this point, obviously, any member that's listed in an application will stem from either the organization leading the hub or a consortium member. And as you see in the application, there's an expectation that you will submit CVs. You will pick which ones you submit, up to 5 as one attachment in PDF, and that you would put forward 5 that demonstrate kind of the range of skills and leadership that we should review in terms of capacity of these individuals to lead the hub for the application. This is a great question from Ana Miranda for Paul. Can subgrants be offered to integrate young researchers in doctoral programs? Perfect. Some of the questions are starting kind of to repeat. So I'll try to tackle the ones that perhaps are slightly different, but also I would encourage you again, and if you go to the document section, you'll find the frequently asked question document, which provides detailed answers to a lot of the questions that we're seeing repeated. Secondly, I would say we have the email address fow@idrc.ca, and at any point up to 2 days before submitting an application, you can send a question and expect an answer in a timely manner from our team. And the frequently asked question document is not only available here in this Kudo presentation, it is also available in the SMA application itself. So you can download it and have access to it at any given point. There's a question from Anika on dispersing funds to partners' accounts. Annette, if I'm understanding the question, maybe you can speak as to how the process for granting works with the lead organization, and then again repeat some of the expectations on that lead hub member being able to disperse funds. How does that happen, and is IDRC involved in that process at all?
Well, IDRC will only enter into agreement with the lead applicant. That means that IDRC will transfer the project funds directly to the lead applicant's bank account. It's the responsibility of the lead applicant to transfer the funds to the co-applicants, as well as the grants that they will select from the call for proposals.
Jeanette. Jillian, there's a question from Paul if we have any kind of publicly accessible research that IDRC used as a basis for including artificial intelligence in this call for proposals.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So there's a few things that went into it just for background, and some of you might find this interesting as you prepare applications as well. On the technology side, there's been several initiatives across IDRC. I'll give you a couple names you can look at. One is called Future of Work in the Global South, FOIGS, and the other one is called Women Work in the Platform Economy. And both of those, as well as a few other initiatives, have really gone into thinking about the role of technology in the changing nature of work. And then to push that a little bit forward, we have a large initiative at IDRC called AI for D, Artificial Intelligence for Development. You can do some background reading there, but a key document is IDRC's white paper on white paper on artificial intelligence, and that can give you a pretty good overview of how we think about AI. And at this point, I mean, I would say because of how it's changing, the last few months, we have seen this rapid rise in the kinds of AI that will actually have a big impact on labor markets, but it's so new that this is a great opportunity for new research that really defines what that's going to look like in the future and has a predictive function and talking about skills development and so on. So that's not been done yet because all of the generative AI models and things like that are just, they're really kind of coming into their own. So, but I would refer you to the white paper to get a good understanding of IDRC's sort of stance and thinking through the role of AI in development.
Thank you, Jillian. Sandro asked if there's a standard consortium format. The answer is no. We're having applicants determine how the consortium is put together in terms of memberships, governance structure, and there has to be a demonstration of how that structure aligns with the call objectives and the activities you intend to support. Does the principal investigator necessarily need to be from the lead institution responsible for dispersing the funds? Paul, would you like to address this one? Thank you. And I see Jillian was kind enough to put reference to the artificial intelligence white paper that she alluded to in the chat. There's also in the chat, you will find again the link to the application for this call, which is on SMA Apply. And a reminder that the call announcement with the link to the application, the frequently asked questions section, and the call document is available on our website under the funding category. So if you're interested in applying, you have it accessible there. If you want to share with your networks, it's also accessible there for you to do so. I'm going to tackle a few more that are different. I'm seeing again some repetition. And okay, let's see. There's one on, is there a specified minimum yearly operational budget for a leading organization? Annette, I think you've spoken to this already, but if you want to clarify for the last time, if there's any requirements and budget that people need to know about for the lead.
For the lead organization, what we expect is has a solid financial and administrative capacities, because this will be a hub, it will be regional projects, and it will have to manage a significant funding, and also has the capacity to transfer the funds abroad and to other institutions. But we don't have a minimum year operation.
Perfect. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that we haven't tackled, but I think we've addressed in one way or another kind of all of the questions here. So I'll give a few final reminders and then we'll close the session. The applications are due June 26th. If you, at any point you have additional questions that emerge as you're reviewing the call documents, you can contact us by email at the FutureWORKS, FOW@idrc.ca email account, and you'll receive an answer in a couple of days maximum from either member of our team. Also, the frequently asked question document, which is available here for download under the document section, will give you answers. If there's any new questions that emerge, what we'll do is we'll update in real time the FAQ. So we invite you to consult it frequently, as we're going to try to capture in macro level ways a lot of the questions that are emerging from you. So you're not just getting an email response, but everyone can see frequently asked questions responded by our team. If you have any difficulties with SMA Apply, we would encourage you to send those concerns. Do not leave your application for the last minute, so we can provide you an answer at least 2 days before the application is due. Final word of warning on SMA Apply. There are a number of sections you need to complete. There is the formal application format, and then there is accompanying documents that you need to send, which, as you've reviewed in the call, includes things like work plan, sending a budget template, the CVs of team members that you want us to review. As you go through the SMA call, you're going to answer the application form, and then on the left-hand side, you're going to see all those sections that need to be completed. A recommendation, do not hit submit your application until you've complied with all of those fields. Otherwise, your application will not be completed and will not be eligible. So just a kind reminder of that, and again, a final recommendation to maybe start your application in Word after downloading the application document, so you have a version saved and you can copy and paste the fields into the SMA form. Will there be a similar call to apply to knowledge translation and learning organizations? That's a great question, Rahav. We first wanted to assess kind of the type of hubs that are applying, and then we will select a KT organization subsequently. Likely this process will be through a call as well. We will be sharing information on that in a timely manner, and of course be ready to answer any calls you might have on that. Okay, I think that's it. If we've missed anything, again, don't hesitate to reach out. I want to thank you all for your interest in this call. We're happy to be a resource up until June 26th. If you're not selected after that time, you will see in the call document timelines for when you're expected to hear an automatic message saying you have not been selected. We will not be sending feedback to organizations not selected, but if you are selected to move on, you will receive feedback from our evaluators to then work on a final proposal for a grant. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Annette, Paul, Jillian, and the Kudo team for all your support.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure. I actually have a team meeting right now. Could we maybe reconnect tomorrow? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody.